Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Lisa, 1SingingLady Gilliam with your LLG Random But Real Wednesday Word on Word Wednesday. I'm excited because today I have my pastor, and I consider him my friend, Isaiah Long, and we're just going to talk about just some of the things that have happened over the years, the things that have happened within mental health. And I really think it's important that ministers and pastors have an understanding of the mental aspect of things and not just the emotional or the spiritual, I should say, aspect of things. So first, I'm going to let him actually introduce himself, and you take the floor.
Well, hey, everybody. My name is Isaiah Long. I pastor a church in Northeast Washington, D.C., Baptized Believers Church. Me and my wife serve as the leaders there. I'm honored to be a part of this dialogue. I do believe that mental health is something that we have overlooked in the church for a long time. It's almost been kind of a taboo type of situation. But I think nowadays, more recent times, mental health has become one of the things that people are addressing more. They're paying more attention to it, not just sweeping it under the rug, not just brushing it off and telling people to go pray about it, but actually implementing things, taking initiative to empower people as it relates to their mental health. So I'm honored to be here and have this conversation and converse with my sister. And yeah.
Awesome. And Dr. Braxy, as she goes by online, Lorna, who helped with Celebrate Life, she said, "Hi, Pastor Isaiah." So,
hey, what's up, Lorna?
So, one of the things let me just tell you all how we met. So, actually, my friend, my junior high school friend, best friend, died. And Pastor Isaiah was the one giving the eulogy. And so it's funny how God ordains relationships because I was nervous. Like, it was a lot of my friends that I hadn't seen in years that were coming, maybe like 18, 20 years. And I remember I had sang at this particular funeral home before. And so I had on sandals at that time. And when I walked, even though there were sandals, it sounded like flip-flops. And I was just like, this is making entirely too much noise to get to the front just to go sing. So this time I sat up front, and this guy was sitting there on the side, just, and I don't know how we started talking, and he was like, "You'll be fine." And then he puts his collar on. And I was like, I felt like I had been tricked. Because we had like this great conversation, just encouraging. And then but the message that day, I had been looking for a church home, and the message that day was so powerful. I knew God was speaking to me through him. And so I started visiting. And once I visited, like, God led me to ask him if I could do Celebrate Life at his church, which is I was doing an annual event that talks about the symptoms of prevention. Well, oh my gosh, I'm tongue-tied. The symptoms of depression in order to prevent suicide. And so I'm thinking that this guy is not going to say yes. He don't really know me. Like, why would he want me to be able to do this there or whatever? But for whatever reasons, he said yes. And then he said on top of that, but I don't want to charge, entry for the people. I want to do this for people. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I haven't met a lot of pastors who really have a servant's heart. And so I appreciate that about you. You've always been that way. And then you even helped me and like paid for the flyers. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't have to do any of that. But I do want to ask you, one on camera, what made you want to even participate or even open it up at the church?
I do remember that time. I remember you told that story about how we met, and it took me back. That's 5 years ago. Sister Angel, I believe her name was.
Angelique. Yep.
Angelique, that's it.
Yep.
And we sat there and talked while I was setting up my equipment. That's but when you introduced the idea of Celebrate Life, it actually was a blessing because you introduced me to ideas and started a conversation in my mind that I wasn't having as it relates to suicide prevention. I mean, I do believe even back then you were having it in September, which is suicide month.
Yeah.
So, and that just kind of started a dialogue. I felt the genuineness of your heart, but also I locked into the mission. And the mission of getting the word out, sharing testimonies of overcomers, making people aware. Awareness is a big deal with me right now. because we have been ignorant for so many things for so long. And I don't mean the word ignorance as a put down, but just ignorant in the sense of not knowing. And
Right.
And we just been ignorant for so long about things like suicide and things like mental health, which leads to anxiety and post-traumatic syndrome and post-traumatic depression and depression and, you know, bipolar issue. I mean, just the whole list of things that are result that can lead to suicide.
Yes.
And so I believe that it was something that was relevant for us to talk about in the church without a stigma. You know, because the only conversation we've really ever had before as it relates to suicide is, you know, don't commit suicide or you're going to go to hell because you don't have an opportunity to repent. I mean, that's, you know, that's the extent of the conversation.
Right.
But I believe that God is broadening us and broadening our understanding. And so when you introduced me to the idea of having an event that celebrated life, but also made us aware of suicide and some of the things that leads up to it and how people can sit right amongst us and be dealing with those suicidal thoughts. I thought it was relevant. And I mean, it was no way I could say no.
Well, I am very glad that you did. And even though I don't do that particular event this month, you know, this is my way of still reaching out.
Yeah.
Mental health will always be something I'm passionate about. I have not been shy in saying that I wanted to commit suicide at one point in my life. And people didn't know that because I was preaching, I was teaching, I was singing, you know, and what it was is everybody in the audience might have been blessed, but inside I was broken and I was hurting. And there's still areas in my life that are broken, but I'm getting help. You know, I was a counselor who would seek counseling. And so one of the biggest disconnects in what you know, kind of said is that a lot of pastors, a lot of churches in general don't talk about this. It is a taboo subject. And so, you know, I believe that we are supposed to, or we're led to meet people at the point of their need. You know, that's what Christ did. And so, but when it comes to this one issue, this one big issue, it's like no holds bars. I'm not talking about that. And it is because the minister or the pastor themselves are not knowledgeable, or is it that they don't care, or they don't want to even do the research, you know? And so one of the biggest things I said over and over again is that we'll do the research for a physical illness, but we won't do the research for a mental illness. Why do you think that, you know, some churches have that stance where it's like, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to focus only on the spiritual, as if it's not a connection, because there is a connection.
I believe it's a connection. And to answer that question, I feel like a lot of times we over spiritualize things. And what I mean by that is I do believe that the spirit realm exists in everything that we do and say. However, I think we can over spiritualize things to the point where if we can't deal with it at the altar, then it ain't no answer. And I believe not in the either or philosophy. I believe in the and with philosophy, whereas prayer is relevant, prayer is important, and we can't do it without Christ. But Christ may give you a serum or an antidote through the means of a conversation that you can have with somebody on a counseling session, whereas it may not take place with somebody laying hands on you at the altar. And I think that's been our limitation is we over spiritualize it. And if it doesn't come by way of laying on the hands, then for a lot of times we bypass the possibility that God can use other means to bring restoration, healing, and deliverance in somebody's life.
Right. And I, just so you know, if I'm looking away, I'm sharing this. I want people to share this. So if you are watching, please share this with other people, because it's definitely something, especially your pastors, your ministers at your church, because this might be the only way they even think to have the conversation. One of the things that Pastor Isaiah said is it, you know, took me coming to him to say, hey, can we do this event there, that opened up the fact that, you know, we really aren't talking about this as much as we should. And so each one teach one. So you all like, share, and subscribe to this page, because we're doing this every month and might even continue. So What do you think? What have you learned over the years of doing Celebrate Life? Because this is another thing I appreciate about you. And I've done this event at different churches, and not every pastor is the same. Some have been more helpful than others, have been more engaged than others. But you always, jumped in. It's like, what do you need? What can I learn? Whatever it was that I needed your help from or your assistance from, and then you took notes. And I'm not saying that you necessarily had to write everything down, but you would say things back to me that let me know that you were actually listening to what the speakers were saying. So what are some of the things you learned as a pastor, number one, and how has that helped you with like members of the congregation who may have had some mental health disorders, whether they were diagnosed or undiagnosed?
Oh man, that's a great question. It's a loaded question, but I'll take a couple pieces out. So many lessons. Two in particular that I think of. One is as it relates specifically to suicide and just the understanding of suicide. I think, not only is the idea taboo in the church, but even the language is taboo. And here's what I mean by that. You'll have a person that will be transparent, much like yourself. You were a few moments ago, and say, I've considered suicide at a point in my life. And then people will, kind of look at that like, oh, wow, I thought she had the Holy Ghost, and, I thought she knew Jesus and those type of things. However, if you take away the terminology, I think a lot of people can relate to the idea of having feelings like, I wonder what it would be like if I was not here. So that in itself, it might not even go as far as to death, but just to the idea of imagining what it would be like to remove yourself and to not be present and to not be here is challenge enough for us to pay attention. Because why do you feel like things would be better if you weren't here? Why do you feel so invalidated? Why do you feel so inadequate, or whatever the case may be? So just one of the things that I learned was to redefine some of the terminology that we've grown up with that was kind of taboo, and kind of see it in a different way. And if you see it in a different way, sometimes you can make connections to people that you would not have normally been able to make. Because yes, and I'm going to use this as an example, not to be insensitive, but everybody might not have sat in a car with a loaded gun and said, this is going to be it. But you might have sat in your house and wondered, what would it be like if I was not here? You see? And so just the challenge to redefine. I'm answering the question and saying, I've learned the challenge of redefining terminology, and seeing how applicable it can be to other people that may not have necessarily saw themselves as being suicidal. The other thing that I would say that I learned was it just really just helped broaden my understanding of what a pastor's role is. Again, awareness is important. It's important for individuals to be aware of their mental health, but it's also important for pastors to be aware of the idea of mental health, because a pastor's role is to shepherd, is to lead, and the leading is the secular word, shepherding is the religious word, right? We shepherd sheep to greener pastures, right? But what does that greener pasture mean? What does that look like? It could look like to be empathetic in your listening. It can be to be suggestive and supportive. It can be a leading to resources and made available. But if I don't even think that mental health is an issue, I'm not going to suggest you go to counseling. I'm not going to suggest that you talk to somebody besides one of our ministers at the altar. You see what I'm saying? So it just really broadened my perspective on and my understanding on what it meant really to be a pastor and to lead people to, or shepherd people to, those greener pastures.
I appreciate that. It's a lot that you said. I'm trying to think of which part get on. But one of the things I also appreciate is that I could tell you that, because you were talking about how some people would be like, well, I don't understand why you want to commit suicide because you got the Holy Ghost and you're saved. And yeah, I was all of that. And I still had thoughts of depression. And another thing you just said was, so there's, and my friend Ashley Burton, who you also know, spoke at my school today, and she was talking about just the different, I guess, aspects or spectrums of suicide. So you could have thoughts, but not have, the intent to actually want to carry out the plan, or you might be full fledged and want to carry out the plan. But you're right. I've also, shared just, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, I was saying, or it might have been last week's interview, that you could be depressed and not necessarily have a diagnosis of depression. They could be two different things. And so if you have a diagnosis, it's over time. And so it's not just like today I'm sad. You could be sad and not even depressed. There's so many different levels. But I think the biggest things that I would love for pastors to see is to really tap into, like you said, empathy, and tap into the feelings, the emotions of people, because we're emotional beings. Yeah. And so many people don't want to deal with emotions. It baffles me, or they're not equipping themselves to know how to respond when someone says that. Yeah. And I feel like that's, like you said, if you're a shepherd, if you're a leader, it's your responsibility. If you don't know what it means, if it was a question in a spiritual context, you would study it and get back to the person. So why not study it and get back to the person when it comes to it, or have resources so you can send someone who is having those issues, like you said, there. I think that's super, super important. So in this, since we've done Celebrate Life, and you've had, like, I guess the only word that comes to mind is enlightening about, mental health. Have you
being enlightened? It's continuing.
Being enlightening, yes. Have you had more conversations with other pastors or minister friends about that topic?
To be honest, no. I have had very limited, maybe with 2 or 3 other pastors, maybe, but it isn't an extensive conversation that I've had.
Okay. And so, sometimes I get challenges. So I would challenge you to do that, because this is the thing. If you have been enlightened, but you don't share that with more people that you have the conversations with, then we kind of stay in the same place, the stuck place. You know what I mean? Of us doing, or spreading it. And in May, we did it this year, actually, with Peace Lutheran Church. One of my coworkers, Mrs. Gaines, her husband is a pastor, Pastor Lloyd Gaines, and we did it on Zoom. And May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so not just suicide. And so we got on the Zoom and we talked to, it was just like a symposium, a discussion about, so how we could do different things within the church and kind of, bring more awareness. And so I hope to do that again in May. And just to invite more pastors. It's funny, a lot of times it was the lay people in the church. Like I know a lot of pastors personally, but I've also heard some of them tell me, well, don't you think if you're depressed, you're not trusting God? And so it's a constant fight for the individual who's been ill, because it's mental illness, to say, yeah, I do love Jesus, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, but this is still just like a person who has diabetes, which I also have, and I'm not healed yet, but I believe that God can heal me. You know what I mean? I believe that God can heal me from depression. It's mental illness, physical illness is still illness. And we need to stop separating it and make it a general thing. So maybe we'll think differently about it. You want to say something?
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point. I mean, just the connection between the mental health and the way it affects us, right? I would think, when I used to play ball, I don't play no more. I can't. And you twist an ankle, right? It affects the way you move. It affects the way you run, jump, right? If you get a toothache, it affects the way you talk. It affects the way you chew. Well, mental health affects things about us as well. The mental health affects your emotions, affects you psychologically, affects your behavior. It affects, you socially, in the way you socially interact. And I think that has been the ignorance that, that I spoke of earlier is just not really putting the two together, that there can be something happening in my mind that I have no control over. That's the key. And I think, a lot of the churches sometimes can preach bad theology and saying that, if it's in your mind, everything in your mind, you got control over. Well, there may be some neurological,
Right.
right?
We got it. Right.
Neurological activity taking place in the brain that you don't have control, and that would be another one of those things that I learned through being made aware, is the neurological activity that can take place in the mind that can have an effect on the way a person's quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that, and to say it succinctly, just everything's not a demon.
High five. Amen. Amen. Amen.
A demon.
Absolutely.
And I mean, now to jump biblical, if you go through the Bible, there were so many different issues of sickness, physical sickness that was talked about. There was, tuberculosis, boils, deafness, blindness, epilepsy. When the boy got thrown into the fire, that epileptic, he had a seizure. He was having a seizure. And in our day, it would be foolish enough for somebody to be having a seizure, and all we want to do is bring them to the altar and lay hands on them. They might need that, carbiditrol, or that, the seizure.
Yeah.
I know people that have seizures, so I know the medicine. So they may need that medication along with prayer. I'm not saying that we don't pray, and there is healing. There is the miraculous. But we also know that sometimes God will do a miracle, but sometimes God will work through something to do the miracle. And
absolutely.
It might be medication. It might be, and in the case of depression or one of the mental health issues that manifest in anxiety or depression, it might be to talk to somebody. It might be to have conversations, converse with somebody that's trained, that can help you work through and find your empowerment.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that sometimes, people forget Paul was like, this was a thorn in my side. Like there was that one thing that he was not healed of. And so sometimes I feel like the things that I've gone through with regards to mental health, whether it was depression, the anxiety, the PTSD, which I'm still dealing with, PTSD, which depression is a part of that and anxiety is a part of that. That this led me to my calling. It led me to want to do this. And so, no, I didn't want it. It's not something that I wanted to do, but I thank God for that. I can literally say there are countless numbers of people that I've been able to be a blessing to and for because of this, So Lorna said, are there any tips for combating those in the church who say depression means you don't love the Lord and or have no faith? And she says, I found that those people make her feel worse. What would you say to that?
One, just I'm gonna chop that question up. The combating is no combating. If somebody does not align with your views of theology and your experience with God, then you might have to find a situation where you can get the support that you need. But we're not gonna combat. But how does she deal with it? Again, it's all about community, right? One of the things that I found that I've learned that is important in this season, when we're being made aware of mental health, the individual needs to know that they're validated and they need community. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've seen, and I'm very limited in my knowledge, very limited, but in my limitation, I've talked to a few people and I've learned that one of the things that adds to the issue is the isolation. The fact that you're going through and you feel like you can't do nothing about it, and don't nobody understand you, and all of that. So community is important. So I would suggest to her or anybody that finding a community where you can be validated, not enabled, because we're not talking about somebody just going through an issue and okay, they going through that, so just let them do what they do. No, we're gonna try to work through it. We're gonna try to develop and grow, and however that looks. But it's got to be in a situation where you're being supported, being encouraged, being developed, being matured, learning, growing. It's community, man. It's community. Yeah.
Hey man, that's I'm like, oh, I should have told my instructional assistant. She's been talking about community and actually mentioned community today. And so it's been coming up, and that, includes the
Wow.
church and the people that you're around,
Yeah.
or someone says something that you don't agree with, like you were saying, then you find somebody who does
Yeah.
agree with you, that's going to help you, that's going to sharpen their iron, you know what I'm saying, and not stay focused on the negative, or but you're right, isolation is one of the biggest ways that we get destroyed. Cool.
Can I speak to that too?
Absolutely.
And I don't want to imply that I'm telling a person to just jump ship and leave churches and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because it may have been a minister in the church that she talked to or he talked to that doesn't represent the whole. So I just want to be clear that it's just about finding a community that embraces you and supports you. That's all.
Yeah, I understand. The church comment was mine. I will just say that. As you can see, he and I've had very open conversation. Like what we're talking about, like right now, we've talked like this just in general, and I appreciate that. Like I said, I have not had that all my life, and I pretty much was in church all my life. And so it's good that you can talk to somebody who, whether they know or don't know, is willing to kind of walk you through the fire, so to speak, because mental health issues can be fiery. They really, at least in my experience, it's not, I've never heard anyone say, yes, I'm so glad I'm depressed. I'm so glad I have schizophrenia, or I'm so glad that, my bipolar is been up and down today. You know what I mean? That's not what, that's not what we want. Ashley said, this is good. Thanks, Ashley. So, what would you say for someone, like say a minister is watching, or they watch it in the replay, what advice would you give them when it comes to, what, I was listening to them, maybe I should be a little bit more open to like mental health and just depression awareness, suicide prevention. How should I get started?
That's a great question. And I would say in the most organic way, it would start with empathetic listening without going to a program or going to school or getting some type of, formal training. Just conversing with people and listening with a new ear. Mm-hmm. Listening with an ear to not just, again, over spiritualize it, but to really hear where they're coming from. And from there, maybe research or seek out a specific resource to support that, and then just start building your repertoire or your Rolodex of resources. I would say that, just like anything else. I mean, you got to pick up one block at a time to build a house, and so I would say just conversing with people, but listening with a less of a preachy tone. Less of a, laying hands, Jesus going to do it. Yes, Jesus going to do it. But we need to seek and pray how he wants to do it. Mm-hmm. He may not want to do it through the traditional means in which you are offering. He may want to use another avenue. And so I would just say that would be ground zero for me. He got people, or has people in their congregation, people that they're ministering to, that God has made them responsible for to shepherd. Start with those people. You ain't gotta go looking. They sitting right there.
They're there, right? Absolutely. It's something you said, and I just forgot it. Oh, okay. So I've shared with you, and you're very aware that it was sometimes a minister or someone of the cloth that triggered me. With something that they said, just like you said, not in ignorance, not necessarily because they meant to hurt me, but just ignorant. So what do you think is maybe one of the first steps outside of that, the empathetic listening or whatever, that either pastors or ministers can do, or even church leaders? Because a lot of times church leaders, it's almost like being a teacher, how when we're in the classroom, we might hear what the students say first before the counselor, before the administrator. What do you suggest that they do if someone comes to them and says, you know what, I'm having suicidal thoughts?
Either they get trained or connect them with somebody that's trained. That would be my next step. Me personally, I've actually sought out opportunities where I could be trained, and as well as school, formal education. But I would say that would probably be the next step. So once God starts to really transform the way you think about it, the next step, if you have the resources and the time and, all things permit, then the next step would be to receive some type of training, be educated, or be humble enough to connect them with somebody that is educated and not feel so threatened. This my member, this my that.
Yes.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Especially when it's life or death. Exactly.
Now let me jump out of this and just say we got to lose the possessiveness. This mine, that's what you taking my this, you taking my leader, no. They need to get the help they can get, and we're all one kingdom. So if they get it on the east wing of the kingdom, you got to be okay with that.
Absolutely.
Because I don't believe that every church has everything. I don't believe. Right. So there may be a ministry or a resource that you can connect them to outside of the realm of what God has given you the capacity to offer.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
So answer training and then connection.
Training and connection. Ashley says, seek on how God wants to do it. Yes. One of the things that you said, I do definitely think that's important. I would, again, like to see pastors know just like the steps. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm having suicidal thoughts, then I feel like the pastors or ministers, that's just in the everyday walk, should be equipped to say, hey, do you have a plan? And if they say yes, then to call 911. Like, it's little simple things that anybody on the street could even know, to do that. So that I think one of the worst feelings, and I shared this last week too, is I remember when God had laid on my heart to call somebody to check on them, and I didn't do it. And I found out that they tried to commit suicide by swerving into traffic. And I felt horrible. Thank God they survived. So the next time when I had the opportunity to, unfortunately, another friend, I told him about the first story, and he was like, it's funny you said that, because my gun's right there on the other side, on the table right there. And I was just like, wow, like, had I not stopped doing what I was doing, because I was supposed to be going to hear my godmother get or see her get honored, but it was something in his voice that just was not right. And, I listened to what God let me do and go, and, he's still here alive today, not because of me, nothing I did, but just allowing God to use me in those ways. So it's suicide prevention can be so easy. It really can. If we listen, the symptoms are there. If we look at the signs, if they're giving away all their items, that they're giving away their items. They're gaining weight or losing weight. Ashley and I talked about that at the first session. And she said they can take the mental health first aid certification class, which is open to everybody. They even have a youth mental health first aid. And mine is like, it was $25 when I went, which is very simple. And you're right. Every specific little things that you can take just to be equipped.
Yeah.
Really good idea, Ashley. Thank you.
I would do that.
Yeah, so they have a website and everything. I don't have it right now, but I could probably
post it in the link.
Yeah, I would have to look into nothing. But if you have it, Ashley, if you're able to post it in put it in the link or whatever, because I don't have the actual website. I get their emails. You can sign up for their emails. They have a newsletter, and they will, come to your church or your location, or they probably have Zoom classes, because everybody's doing everything on Zoom. But it definitely teaches you the baseline information. So, but that's good. You're willing to do it. That's awesome. I don't know why.
I certainly would.
That's good. That's good. Is there anything, like, those were my main points that I really wanted to get out. Is there anything that you wanted to share, or anything that you think is really important, just in this month, specifically being Suicide Prevention Month, and you can be as spiritual or as deep as you want to, or you could be like just straight, Isaiah, or you could be past Isaiah. You get the choice.
Isaiah.
All right.
All jokes aside, one of the things that I would like to just make clear from my perspective is the relationship that I feel the Bible plays and spirituality plays as it relates to mental health. Because we definitely just kind of laid a foundation that You know, we don't want to over spiritualize something when somebody just may need to have a conversation, may need to talk to a counselor or something like that. However, I do believe that there is a spiritual side to it, to support. And so what I would just offer anybody, a pastor, lay member, but anybody that considers the Bible to be their authority, I would just offer to them, while someone is going through their process, we want to implement the spiritual disciplines in support of them.
Right.
Patience, long suffering.
Say that again, because you need both.
You need long suffering, meekness, gentleness, kindness. And when you're dealing with somebody that may be going through a mental issue, it can be frustrating. Yes. It can be frustrating because they're trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure it out. But while you're doing that, I just would implore us to implement those spiritual disciplines and principles as we offer support, because the support may not be just laying hands on the altar. It may be them getting other resources, connecting to other resources. But as they connect to other resources, when they come back to your community, how you going to treat them? How you going to receive them? How you going to support them? And so that's the only thing I would offer. Different.
That's awesome. And while you were talking, I found it. It's mentalhealthfirstaid.org, and you can go there, and it's actually typed in the comments, so you're able to, anybody that's watching, any pastors that are watching, share this, like I said, with your friends. If you know a pastor, even if they're not even aware, share it with them anyway, please, so they can watch it, and just be educated on this topic. I actually don't have it. This like been our fastest, our quickest interview. So, and I know you don't, belabor the point, and I don't have to do that either. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time to not only speak to me, but to anybody that's watching, and even for those who are going to watch the replay, because there are going to be people that watch it later. I appreciate you always. I love you from the bottom of my heart. You and your family, you always have a special place in my life. And I just appreciate that I can always talk to you about whatever, whether you agree or disagree. Like you've always been empathetic. Like you really, truly are the epitome of, I would say Christ personified, in the sense that it's always been like, okay, you'll listen, you shepherd, and, never did I ever feel like you were coming against me because of the mental health issues that I was having. And when you struggled with that, off and on your life, it really does mean a lot to someone like me. And I'm sure other people, I know that anybody that I've actually introduced you to has kind of said the same thing. So it must mean your character means something.
Amen. Amen.
So praise God for that.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your passion and the ministry that God has given you. And I support 100%. I like what you're doing, because you're showing that ministry doesn't just have to be in the traditional form. It can manifest itself in many different ways. And I just believe that with, all that's going on, COVID-19, I think that's one of the things that God is just really imparting upon the church, is just that ministry can look different. It can look different ways. And you're embracing that. And I just, Godspeed to you, and anything I can do to support, I'm here.
I know. I appreciate it. Ashley said, thank you both. Again, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Pastor Isaiah, or Isaiah. I call you both. I appreciate it, and I'll be in touch soon. You all be blessed. Please like, share, and subscribe this. Oh, do you want to give out? Do you know your social media by heart?
Well, my Instagram and Facebook is Isaiah.long0. And our church website is BABeliever.org.
Awesome. So you all make sure you follow him and follow Baptized Believers Church online. If you have any questions, then you can just leave it in the chat and I will follow up. Thanks again for watching, and thanks again, Pastor Isaiah, for being with us. You all have a blessed night. Good night.
All right.